Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with The Boys. Yes, we are. The Boys, Volume 3. This one's kind of interesting. This story's kind of interesting. Much like we did with the last two ones, we're going to do the regular one here on YouTube, then we're going to put the uncensored one on Patreon, so you guys can check that out if you want to. As always, it costs like $1, right? So it's not anything unruly or anything crazy. Here's the other question that I have for you guys, too, about the Rob Core rings. The Rob Core rings are currently available on Patreon. People stopped asking for them. Like, whenever I would select the winners, people stopped responding. So I was like, okay, well, I guess people don't want them anymore. But people seem to have an interest in them now. The issue is that it's like $20 a month, essentially for a chance to win one, because I couldn't really think of a better way than to like mail them out all the time. And if I set up a store, they would be sold out like that. So maybe $20 is like too much. Maybe it should be like 5 or 10 or something like that. I don't know. Let me know down in the comment section if that's something you guys are interested in. I can't really think of a way to do it without, because I mean, it costs me money to get them. So I mean, I don't really want to lose cash and like sending them out to you guys, but I want you guys to be able to have them. Give me some ideas. Like, let me know what you guys think. But anyway, this one picks up with the whole thing with like Tech Knight, right? Now, Tech Knight, he's a character that we haven't really seen before, just now being introduced, basically. The problem and the funny thing about this is that when Garth Ennis first introduces him, Tech Knight's a guy who just can't stop like having sex with things, basically. And like when we're talking about things, like we're not just talking about people, we're talking about like everything, right? Like anything that seems to arouse him or turns him on, he can't stop like sleeping with it. And it gets kind of crazy because like when he's talking to the psychologist about this, what he does is kind of talk about how all this really seemed to kick in. And this all basically happened when he was on his superhero team called Payback. Now he of course is like a founding member of it, but they had basically received a tip, out there in the middle of nowhere that something was going down. It turned out not to be the case. But when they were on their way back, there was one of the guys there named Mindroid. He started looking at his backside and he was like, it's a really amazing backside. And it immediately got him aroused and turned him on. And while that's not the worst thing ever, what is a problem here is he tried to get with him while they were flying. He tried to get with the guy. Of course, he was kicked off the team. And the result is that he's just kind of in this rut now where like everything he sees, he wants to basically get with. It's funny. At least it kind of cracked me up. But from here, it basically goes into like this kind of explanation when he says this every single thing. Like he's tried to get with like cups. He's tried to get with all kinds of stuff. Like everything he sees, he wants to sleep with. And so you get this crazy situation where the therapist is like, okay, fine. Yes, we really need to talk with each other. I'll go get my appointment book. And while he's gone, like as soon as he gets back in, the cat comes running out. And then the therapist is sitting there for a second. And he was like, and at first he thought that Tech Knight had gotten with the cat, which he did, or at least tried to. Then the other thing he realized is that like he basically had intercourse with his cup of coffee. And so it's like, and that's after the guy drinks it. So it's like, okay. So like basically he kicks him out. He's like, don't ever come back here again. Now this is one of the reasons why I like Garth Ennis writing, because it's kind of like this dark humor, right? Because you pick up with Huey and you've basically got Frenchie and like the girl, again, we don't really know her name, who are playing Monopoly on a Clue board. Now here's the thing, it's referred to as Cluedo, and I actually had to look it up. I had no idea what Cluedo was. I was like, maybe it is Clue, but I'm not sure. So like I had to look it up, and it is Clue. And then I found out they're doing a remake of Clue. Why? Like, dude, the original was amazing with Tim Curry. Dude, that movie's fantastic. But Huey's kind of like, why are they playing Monopoly on a Clue board? And the response of Mother's Milk is like, because they're just crazy. Like, because they're crazy. That's why. That's really all there is to it. The other cool thing about this, and really in response to the big battle that they had previously with the Teenage Kicks, is that Huey seemed overwhelmed, right? Because he couldn't really differentiate between who is a good guy and who is a bad guy in the blink of an eye, right? And one of the things that you're talking about when you're talking about superheroes and even those like the boys who basically have enhanced abilities now, who were facing off against various superheroes, is that some move at super speed, some are super strong, like some have a combination of both or almost any other kind of power. And so you have to be able to know on the fly who's a bad guy and who's not. And so what this means is that Butcher actually ended up getting Huey this great big black trench coat, which is kind of a cool thing. It's pretty cool. It's kind of officially inducting him into the team and basically saying like, anybody that you see that's not wearing this when we're in the middle of a fight, that's a person you attack. It's pretty simple, and it's a pretty elegant way to kind of clear any confusion that might be out there in the midst of a heated battle. But from there, you end up picking up at a comic book store. And this is a cool little moment because what you end up having is kind of this revelation from Butcher in terms of comic books serving as basically like the public eye of superheroes, right? And it makes sense. Comic books in the real world here, comic books give us idealized or fantasized examples of what superheroes would be like. In the world of the boys, the comic books are essentially propaganda. There's these superheroes out there, all these people who have powers, whether they've taken Compound V or not, and then it's how they're depicted by the world, how the world sees them, and the world sees them through the lens of a comic book. So it's basically like this character did this and this character did that, and see, they're great superheroes, and we have stories to model them after, right? And so the reality is anything but. One of the things Butcher points points out is that a lot of the superheroes out there are gay, a lot of them are lesbians, a lot of them engage in inappropriate acts with children, some of them actually go through and perform surgical operations on themselves. These are people who, aside from the gay and lesbian community in the superhero group, are screwed up, right? Like most everybody else is screwed up in some form or fashion. Now, I'm not really, it's interesting to me that Garth Ennis would look at the example of gays and say like there's a problem with that. I'm not really sure that there is. I don't really know why there would be an issue with a gay superhero, but what it does seem to do is point to the idea that in the world of The Boys, the United States seems to be largely conservative insofar as being gay is not something that's really accepted at the moment. And so with that being the case, these superheroes who are gay out there, if they were to come out and reveal that it doesn't seem like it would go too well. But then you get into the character of Swingwing, and one of the things that really seems to come with him, and we'll talk about him here in a little bit, but one of the things that seems to go on with him is this idea that Swingwing is a character who is gay friendly. But we'll talk about that here in a minute, because it's not really the nature of his character, it's really more of a marketing ploy. But again, it gets kind of cool because what they end up doing is talking to a guy called The Legend. Now, if I'm being honest here, I feel like The Legend is a stand-in for like Stan Lee or Jim Shooter or even like Julius Schwartz at DC Comics or something like that, just kind of like the top guy, right? Like the guy who kind of seems to run everything. Now, The Legend doesn't really run The Boys. The Legend seems to be like this big time information broker. But what ends up happening here is you end up having The Legend, who basically tells Billy Butcher and Huey that he has a nephew named Steven Rubenstein who is basically pushed off a building. And all fingers really seem to point to the fact that it's Swingwing, but he's basically trying to figure out if it's actually the case or not. This basically goes into like the marketing side of things. And again, what you end up learning here is that the marketing side of Swingwing was that he was a gay-friendly superhero. And it wasn't really even because he was. I mean, we won't find out whether or not he was until we get to the end, but it was basically like Vought American, the company that, runs the marketing side of the superhero community, basically going out and saying, this is going to be your brand. Your brand is that you're a gay-friendly superhero. You got to go forward accordingly, whether you want to or not. That's how your superhero functions. That's how it's going to be perceived by the public. That's the role you're going to play. It's intriguing there because when you look at the nature of superheroes, you expect them to be characters who go out and do the right thing because it's what they do, right? The perception of Starlight with regards to like Homelander and the other members, A-Train and so on, the other superheroes who are part of the Seven. But the reality is anything but. And that's why this really seems to bring us down the rabbit hole that nothing is really what it seems to be. And so from there, what you end up doing is picking up with Tech Knight and his butler Thomas. And it's kind of crazy because what you end up finding out here is that presumably in the middle of the night, Tech Knight essentially tried to sleep with his butler, but not in the traditional sense, insofar as he tried to like have sex with his ear is basically what he tried to do here, which is pretty screwed up. And it's kind of nuts, right? Because like this guy is in dire straits and you kind of can't help but feel bad for him, right? You kind of can't help but feel bad for this guy because I mean, we don't really know what set all this off. Like we don't really know what caused all this. And so it kind of sucks and it's kind of messed up, but his butler basically bails, of course, basically saying, hey, look, my job as your butler, as the butler for your family for the last 37 years, my job is to tend to the needs of the family, but not in that way, right? So like your secrets stay safe with me, but I'm out. I gotta go. I gotta bounce out of this place. But then what it does is it moves over to a bar called the Red Rooster. Now, here's the crazy thing here, is once they actually get into this gay bar, Huey kind of seems to be a little uncertain about it and like not really big on it. Let me tell you something, dude, gay bars are fun. Dude, like drag shows, they're fun as hell. Like any of you guys have ever, like if any of you guys have never been to a drag show in your life, like dude, drag shows are hilarious. Like it's funny. You're missing out. Like, and it's funny because it's like cosplay at a comic book convention, right? Like there's the ones who have cosplay and it's like, man, that's amazing cosplay. Then there's the ones who were like, you tried. And that's basically it when it comes to like drag queens, right? When it comes to drag shows. But the fact remains here that getting into this bar, what they end up doing is talking to a guy named Paul Drake. Now, of course, this guy, Paul Drake, this bartender is the guy that they're talking to. And of course, his boyfriend is sitting off to the side. But what they basically do is start asking this guy questions like, what can you tell us about Steven Rubenstein, and what can you tell us about Swingwing? And the funny thing about Swingwing is that where previous questions were asked by the cops, they kind of dismissed it, right? They were like, okay, so it's the death of a gay guy, who really cares? That was the perception of the cops. But where you have like Billy Butcher and Huey showing up here, it's given a lot more credence and taken a lot more seriously. And so that's when questions start getting asked about Steven and Swingwing. What you end up learning is like Paul Drake's boyfriend Max was actually kind of jealous of the character of Steven, because Steven was young and he was attractive and would seem to come in here and draw the attention of a lot of gay guys. But also Max was afraid of the fact that Steven was gonna like run off with his boyfriend, like run off with Paul. Like Paul was gonna leave Max and say, hey, look, this young kid's more attractive. I'll see you when I see you. Peace. And that was gonna be the end of it. And so as a result, it kind of seems like Steven has Max has something to hide. We're not 100% sure here, but basically you're given this bit of information, this perception that with the character of Swingwing, he would constantly show up to like different gay bars, different things like that, and he would basically help members of the gay community who were struggling with tough times, right? Who were struggling with the idea that they were being offended all the time, or people were like physically assaulting them, or whatever the case happened to be. But he would basically sort of talk to them and kind of assure them that there was like better shores out there, greener pastures, so to speak, that in reality, you just kind of got to keep on keeping on. But he was really a shoulder for a lot of members of the gay community to lean on. And then he also brought Tech Knight a couple of times. But at the end of the day, it was one of these things where not a whole lot was known about Swingwing outside of the fact that he would just go out there and he would perform these acts and he would basically be a gay-friendly superhero. And that was essentially it. But from there, you kind of switch over to Tech Knight, right? And Tech Knight's just kind of like, okay, he basically gets this phone call. And the idea was that Tech Knight was supposed to be the newest member of the Seven, right? Until Starlight got the job. But what he's basically told is that, by some voice out there, what he's basically told is, hey, look, we knew you want to be part of the team. Ultimately, you were not chosen because of like the history that's gone on here. You tried to bang Mindroid when you guys were flying back from that mission. Because of all the stuff that you've pulled off in terms of like your inability to control yourself, we decided not to bring you in. And it's one of these things where Tech Knight takes it as a personal affront. And so that's when things get kind of bonkers, because following that, what you end up doing is you end up having Billy Butcher and company who basically show up and start talking directly with Tech Knight himself. Now, going down into the basement, this is what really freaks Tech Knight out so bad, is that essentially Billy Butcher and his experiences over the years has come into contact with various superheroes, and he hasn't really beat them all to a pulp. Instead, what he has done is turned some of them into informants and basically said, like, you're going to provide me information on the various superheroes who are out there, again, which is very, very smart. And so going down there and basically saying, hey, about, 6 months ago, there was this guy, Eagle the Archer, who basically, almost beat his girlfriend to death, beat her into a coma. I used this tactic on him, and he's been dumping me information. So he walks down there and he basically says, daylight, and it turns all the lights on inside of Tech Knight's facility, right? So that's the kind of information he has, is he knows how these guys' base of operations work. And that's when they start asking the questions. That's when they start getting into Tech Knight and basically saying, look, what's going on here? Like what can you tell us about Swingwing? And that's when Tech Knight really kind of seems to drop this bit and saying, hey, look, there were a few times we went to gay bars. I wasn't really digging it, but it was part of his character. And as far as I can tell, he's basically gay. Like, he's a gay guy. It's designed to kind of paint this picture that like Swingwing was a legitimately good dude. And that really seems to be the case, right? Swingwing was like a legitimately great guy. He was a superhero going out there and being a superhero who was friendly for the gay community, for a group that kind of felt ignored or cast off by the larger part of society. And so there really doesn't seem to be a whole lot in terms of the relation between Swingwing and between Steven Rubenstein, because where legend told Billy Butcher and Huey, I think Swingwing was the one who killed him, the information doesn't really seem to line up with that. Why would Swingwing, a member of the gay, or at least a gay superhero who was pro-gay in his superhero actions, why would he in turn kill a member of the gay community? Like, how would that work? I mean, now, it's entirely possible for any number of reasons, but trying to connect those dots, that's the difficult thing to do. Now, the other part of this is, of course, Huey ends up turtle-heading. For those of you guys who don't know, turtle-heading is basically when you got a crap and it just starts making its way out, right? It's a turtle head making its way out of its shell. I know it's kind of a strange phrase. I always enjoy the phrase of prairie dogging is basically what it is. But the difference is that prairie dogging, it keeps going out and coming back in again. You can't quite get it out all the way. But Huey basically ends up like dropping a load inside of Tech Knight's cave, inside of his base of operations. He ends up just like pinching a load off in there. Now from there, this is when things get really interesting, right? Because from there, Huey gets a package. Now when Billy Butcher and Huey had shown up to talk to Drake at the gay bar and his boyfriend Max, they used aliases. This was designed for the purpose of nobody really being able to trace it back to them, because Billy Butcher's got a reputation. People know who Billy Butcher is, and they know he's a guy to look out for. But with these aliases, this phone is basically sent to their address, for the alias of Huey. And when Huey basically looks at it, it's Max ended up basically saying, hey, look, there's a few things that we forgot. Drake kind of says the same thing. And so Max basically starts spilling the beans. And what Max says here is that where Swingwing was basically having like these kind of meetings, basically with members of the homosexual community to kind of help them get past the struggles they were dealing with, that because of the fact that Steven Rubenstein was this young, attractive kid who was seemingly to make passes at Drake, that Max was afraid of losing Drake. And so as a result, he sent Steve after Swingwing because he knew where Swingwing would go when he was changing out of his costume and changing back into his regular clothes. And of course, it wasn't his home. And so he did this because of the fact that he knew that Steve Rubenstein adored the character of Swingwing. It was, he was a gay superhero that Steve Rubenstein absolutely loved. And so because of that, he basically sent him out there and said, hey man, you go do your thing, go talk to him or whatever. And it was done for no other reason than to not have to worry about Steve hitting on Drake. That That was basically the only reason why it was done. And so what you end up finding out is that in addition to all of this, that you basically have the homo superhero is what he's called. That you basically end up having like Tech Knight, who's branded as like a gay superhero. Now, again, this is kind of an interesting scenario here because the way that he's depicted in the presses is not favorable in the way that Swingwing is depicted. But it's also because of the fact that like he was basically branded as a guy who tried to like rape the family butler. That's basically how he's viewed here. And so because of the fact that he's viewed in that way, he's viewed in an inherently negative way because the revelation of his sexuality came to light through a negative act. He's basically branded in a negative light. And so because of the fact this information is dumped out there, what we're told is that like the butler revealed it right off the bat, where the butler was like, hey, look, your secrets are safe with me. As soon as he was out that door, he went to the various presses out there and said, here's the story that I have on a superhero who wants to pay the most, and basically set them all in a bidding war, and then ultimately sold it to the highest bidder, which ended up being the New York Post, which is kind of a crazy thing there. Now, the other thing about this is that Huey is still wrestling with the fact that he may have to take a life, right? It's one of the things that he's still struggling with as being part of the boys. Now, of course, like knowing that Billy Butcher has done it and knowing that Mother Milk seems to have done it, it's one of these things where it's not really a rite of passage. Like, you're not really a member of the boys until you kill someone. It's one of these things where inevitably that scenario is going to come along. Like, something's going to happen where everybody else is incapacitated or Huey's out on his own, and the only way for him to continue living is to take out the person who's trying to bring him harm. And so it's one of these things where he's not quite at that point yet, and Billy Butcher basically says, hey, look, you got to toughen up. There's the world as you see it, then the world the world the way it really is, right? Like, you imagine this fantasy where you don't really have to do things like that, but in our line of work, you have to. No more being a child, no more being a little kid or anything like that. Everybody around here pulls their weight, no exception. And it's kind of a cool point. It's kind of a cool thing, right? Because that really is the way it is. I mean, certainly not like taking lives, but like this perception of the world the way we would like it to be versus how it is. Like, those are usually two starkly different perceptions. Now, from there, it goes into a discussion between Billy Butcher and Huey showing back up at Tech Knight and basically saying, hey, look, so the information you basically fed us about Swingwing is a load of crap. So give us the truth. Like, give us what's really going on. That in truth, like, Swingwing he's not a gay guy. Like, he's not a gay superhero. He's a straight superhero. And so the question is, like, if that's the case, then what's going on? And that's when you kind of get this revelation. It was Vaught American's idea. Like, that's his brand. That's his propaganda piece. Like, that's the role he plays. He plays a gay-friendly superhero, and as far as the world is concerned, he's gay. But the reality is that Swingwing is not. He's not gay at all. Like, he's completely straight. And so initially you have Tech Knight who sort of lashes out and begins to try to go and attack the two of them. And then of course the girl was brought along by Billy Butcher and breaks this guy down piece by piece. And this is one of the interesting things about her is so far we haven't really seen what she does. Like, we've seen her kind of lose her mind and lash out and so on, but it's sort of kept off panel. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about this, right? You know, the idea that like she commits these acts and people get torn apart, but that's basically it. It was kind of a cool element to see in the TV show, but at the same time, the TV show kind of gave me something that I was looking for, which was, what is she actually doing? Is she just like super strong and just ripping these guys apart, or what in the world is going on? It was good to get an answer to that kind of question. But what ends up happening here is Tech Knight basically says, like, myself and Swingwing ended up having a falling out. Like, we basically ended up having this thing where the relationship between the two of us went south because Swingwing was his sidekick Ladio when he was younger, before he went on to become his own superhero. So it's kind of like Batman and Robin, basically. And what you end up finding out here is that there was this character, this female superhero who existed out there who went by the name of Talon. And Talon was basically this younger woman out there, of course, with these claws and so on and so forth. But the way that Tech Knight looks at it, the way he remembers it, is it was really more of a game, right? I mean, they were relatively young at the time. You know, Swingwing was younger than he is now. Talon was a younger woman, and Tech Knight himself was a younger man. And so it was really more of like a game that we were basically playing that really seemed to be going on. It was a cat and mouse game. Sometimes she was a hero, sometimes she was a villain. Sometimes, you know, she fought with us and against us, you know, sometimes whatever the case was, it was really more like, it really seemed to be more of like a romantic chase than anything else, because it was kind of building up this sexual tension between the three of them. And it all really seemed to come to a head a couple years later when she shows up seemingly out of nowhere and basically says, hey, look, like, you should call Ladio, we should get together, you know, we should kind of have a kind of reunion of sorts. And when that happens, like, you basically end up seeing that like Talon seduces both of them. And what they end up doing is getting involved in like a three-way. Basically like spit roasting this chick is basically what ends up happening. It's kind of nuts. You know, it's kind of nuts. Like, they basically end up, you know, running a three-way on this chick. The thing about this is that it seemed to create a rift between Tech Knight and Swingwing, and we don't know exactly why. Tech Knight keeps saying, like, don't look at his face, like, don't look at his face. And so what this seems to indicate, and Garth Ennis doesn't really say it, and I guess it's really left more to speculation than anything else, but what really seems to be indicated here is that Tech Knight eventually went after Ladio, went after Swingwing when he was a sidekick. We don't know for sure. That's not really specified here. It's not really stated explicitly, so we just kind of have to use a circumstance to more or less make a guess, and that really seems to be about that. It could just be that like the situation was so strange to him that he couldn't handle it, and basically it ended up creating problems between the two of them. But from there, the question turns into, we have to go find Swingwing. Like, we have to go ask this guy directly. Like, we have to go figure out what's going on. Now, in all honesty, Huey had kind of been advocating this approach for a while. But the reason why Billy Butcher didn't really do it is because they'd basically be running up on a superhero with no real evidence and just kind of poking and asking questions. And the truth is that they don't know how deep the reaches of Swingwing go. And so it could very well end up being that the boys are heading to talk to somebody, some random person out there somewhere, and they're all dead before they heard the sound that killed them. Like, that's entirely possible. So it's really Billy Butcher playing it smart, trying not to send up a whole bunch of flares and draw the attention of the superhero community to him and what it is that he's doing. And with things like this, with basically murder mysteries, it takes a little bit of finesse. Like, you can't just go in and just start doing things. And so as a result of that, it's kind of cool, because what you get is Huey just kind of taking the moment unto himself, really by force, where, you know, where they go in, they start talking to Swingwing, they're like, look, we need questions, like, we need answers to what's going on with you and Steven Rubenstein, like, what happened between the two of you? And of course, when he basically starts to deny and refuses to answer questions, Huey sort of begins to lash out, and it's just like, you're gonna give us an answer, I'm gonna beat the absolute crap out of you. And of course, where a fight breaks out between himself and Ladio, this basically goes into Huey chasing him down, and then Billy Butcher just kind of being like, sorry man, nothing I can do. You know, the ladder's broken, so you got to handle this one on your own. Now, in reality here, this is an important thing to bear in mind, is one of the things that, again, we've kind of mentioned here, is not all the superheroes who are out there have powers. Swingwing himself, he uses technology. He doesn't really have any kind of powers to speak of. He can't fly, doesn't have telepathy or anything like that. And so it's basically Huey fighting against a normal guy. And so where Huey starts lashing out, he ultimately just gives in and just says, okay, fine, if this is the kind of game that we play, this is the game that I'll play, and just absolutely pummels Swingwing. And so immediately he starts spilling the beans. And he basically just has like this immense amount of hatred for the gay community. Like, he absolutely despises the gay community, seemingly, because what he does is he basically says, like, somewhere along the line, like, I was basically changing into my costume on a rooftop, and then this kid shows up out of nowhere. And right off the bat, I'm like, oh God, here we go. I got to play this role. We're talking to this kid, talking him down about, you know, the struggles of being gay, you know, all that kind of stuff, you know, and like, where I'm communicating with this kid, and he's basically saying there's a guy out there that I'm in love with, and I'm afraid to say something because of how he'll react, and so on and so forth. That Swingwing says, just tell the guy how you feel. And that's exactly what Steven does. Steven says, well, it's you. You're the guy that I'm in love with. And so following that, like, he basically loses his mind. He grabs a kid, pushes him off the building, and that's the end of Steven. But the reason why was because he's just took an absolute personal offense to it. Enough was enough. Like, I basically popped off. Like, I had enough of this, and basically like flipped his mind and then pushed the kid off the rooftop. But again, like it really does kind of come down to interpretation, right? So that's one of the reasons why people will look at this and they'll interpret it based on how they want to see it, right? Based on what they want it to be, as opposed to what it might actually be, right? It's the nature of interpreting things. You know, it's just kind of left to your own biases and what direction that you want to lean in. But it's one of these cool things, is because initially, like, Huey didn't really have the response to beat this guy to death, but we would kind of expect that Billy Butcher would, that he would like beat this guy within an inch of his life. But that doesn't really seem to be the case. Instead, what Billy Butcher does here is use this guy as an informant and say, you're going to go forward and you're going to continue to be a superhero on whatever team that you're going to be on. And from there, you're going to dump us information on everything that we need. If you don't, we're going to reveal this to the world. We're going to tell the world that you killed a gay person. And because of the fact that you're supposed to be a gay-friendly superhero, it will destroy your brand. And Vaught American will abandon you like that. And everything that you've built up to this point will be gone. You'll be living penniless on the streets, and presumably the gay community will start coming after you, which means your days are numbered. And so it's kind of crazy, because where Huey and Billy Butcher are having food following that, it's one of these things where Billy's like, did you think I was being too lenient on him? And the response of Huey, surprisingly, is no, I don't think you were. Like, I think it's better to make him live with his crimes, and then in turn have to be our informant and really nothing else, and then just kind of go from there. And so it's a cool kind of revelation on behalf of Huey, because he's really starting to see how this all kind of comes together. He's really starting to understand the role that the boys play, not insofar as just going out and punishing superheroes, but in trying to systematically bring them down and do it in the most effective way possible, which is a combination of using guerrilla warfare tactics and subterfuge. Again, it's probably one of the most intelligent ways to do that. Now from there, you go into the epilogue, and the epilogue is actually hilarious. The epilogue is funny as hell. What you end up doing is picking up with Tech Knight, who basically is just kind of like, that's it. Like, it's his life is essentially over. He's not really going to be a superhero anymore. And then meteors start crashing down into Earth, right? So it's like a scene out of Armageddon is basically what it is. But literally you have like NASA, who's basically losing their minds. They're freaking out. They're like, dude, there's this asteroid coming to us the size of Texas. Everything's sort of popping off. And Tech Knight's like, no, guys, I got this. If it has a hole, then I can that hole, and I can basically save us. I can save us with sex, like a boss. And so that's exactly what he does. He flies up to this asteroid, which strangely enough has a giant vaginal opening, and just the asteroid until it explodes, and the whole world is cheering him on. He's like the greatest superhero in the world. Like, he saves the world by having sex. Like, the whole world cheers him on. And they're like, yeah, man, like, you're a true hero, Tech Knight. Lay some pipe, dude. Get all up in them sugar walls, which is probably what the Hodge twins would say. But like, literally bangs the thing until it explodes. And then like everybody cheers him on. He dies in the process, but like everybody cheers him on. And Tech Knight basically ends up going out as a superhero. Like, he ends up going out saving the day by having sex with an asteroid until it explodes. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.